Let's spend a moment on President Barack Obama's comments yesterday. In an interview to Christiane Amanpour, Michael Kugelman, he talks about wanting President Biden to do more in his conversations with Prime Minister Modi. Is that something that did the timing strike you as being slightly odd, given the fact that Biden is a Democrat president? He used to be Obama's vice president, and this is Biden's big jamboree. He's invited a guest over, and here pops out President Obama making the kind of comments he did.
Well, let's keep in mind that President Barack Obama, when he was president, speaking in New Delhi in 2015, had made some very similar comments. So one could argue that perhaps he's had these views before and that he didn't just decide to use the opportunity of President Biden meeting with Modi to invoke them. I think that's an important point to put out there. Clearly, President Biden was not going to take his former boss's advice and bring up the issues in that way. I mean, clearly, the administration is concerned about these issues in India, and I think that for the administration, one of the goals was simply to convey that concern in private conversations, but not to push it, to broach it, but not to push it that hard. It's because at the end of the day, that issue likely didn't figure very heavily in the various meetings between Biden and Modi and others. The strategic issues loom larger.
So let's spend a moment on some of those strategic issues, particularly the transfer of technology on a deal as critical as jet engines, Michael Kugelman, which wouldn't have been conceivable some time back. So you've got a private company agreeing to give these kind of technology, make it available to another country, another company. How significant is this, and what do you think is spurring this new move towards America agreeing to transfer technology which wouldn't have been on the table earlier?
It's a combination of several factors. I think we have to remember that President Biden himself has long had a strong interest in a deeper U.S.-India partnership. Going back to his days as a senator, as a vice president, he's long been a strong advocate for partnership. So his own personal desire to move things forward in a big way must have figured to some extent. Also, you have to look at ISET, this major initiative that was concluded some months ago, which is overseen by the national security advisors. And so that suggests a particular strong desire to really push past the bureaucracy and do whatever's necessary to move things forward.
Now, one of the critical questions is whether there'll be any congressional delays on the technology that America has agreed to transfer to India. We saw, for example, David Markey, with the nuclear submarine deal as part of AUKUS, which was to be given to Australia. That got held up about whether such technology should be transferred at all. Do you see adequate bipartisan congressional support even beyond what the administration is saying, or do you think this is, at some level, there's a possibility that there may be some bureaucratic congressional delays?
Look, there's always the possibility of various delays. They can certainly happen on the congressional side to some degree. This is also a complicated deal, and it requires a private company, GE, to go ahead with a major transfer of intellectual property to India. This is something that, the details matter. This won't happen overnight. You mentioned AUKUS. I don't think the problem so much on AUKUS is a political barrier or even a bureaucratic barrier. I think it's an incredibly complicated thing to transfer high-end, really cutting-edge technology to a partner which may or may not be ready to implement it immediately. In both cases, I think it will take time. In the AUKUS deal, we're talking about years, possibly decades, before this comes to full fruition. But that's not a political or congressional problem. That's a practical problem of cooperation.
Just getting into the weeds and the amount of time it takes to get past those weeds. Let's spend a moment on China, Richard Russo, because China wasn't spoken of in any derogatory way at all. Far from. In fact, when the president was asked this question, he tried to calm things down by saying this has got nothing to do with China, but of course it's got a lot to do with China. And despite everything that's being said formally, what do you think is the message that Beijing would likely be drawing from what's being witnessed here in D.C.?
Well, you do see the United States and India finally finding areas to cooperate on strategic technology. Defense has been on there for quite some time, although fits and starts, but strategic technology in the last couple of years has become prime. It's not just in the bilateral, but also in the Quad. So when we talk about China's ability to intimidate others and use commercial coercion in areas like we're talking about quantum, we're talking about AI, we're talking about semiconductor production. If two massive economies like the United States and India can find areas to cooperate and help to blunt China's ability to dominate these spaces in the future, that's going to be powerful, not just for commercial relations, but of course many of the same technologies are going to have massive military application in the future as well. So important for today, important for tomorrow. Hopefully we can get it right, because getting commercial entities to cooperate, it's not always easy for governments to spoke and to stir.
And in fact, what you're mentioning is true, because one of the reasons why there was a problem with the Rafale deal in its original avatar was because the French simply didn't trust Hindustan Aeronautics to be able to manufacture cutting-edge aeroplane fighter jets back home, and now it's the same HAL that now needs to deal with GE. So there are genuine complications, as you said, in just getting it done despite all the intent.
Well, I think a lot of the great technology talent that exists, is there with companies like HCL and TCS and Wipro and others. They haven't always been to the first ones to the table, because when we started talking about India really stoking defense companies, delicensing and privatizing, you saw a lot of the big conglomerates setting up those operations first. Not the technology leaders, but manufacturing leaders. But the tech ability, if you really want to transfer technology, you need the engineering firms to step in, the ones that are already doing back office work for a lot of these companies, and help them produce high-end equipment there. So I think India's got to get that mixed together, but I also like what's happening with the startup environment there as well. I mean, ultimately, developing technology at the root is going to be a lot easier than transferring mature technology and hoping to upgrade it. So getting our startups and our universities to work together in tech areas, that's going to be but it's going to take a long time to gestate.